Here is a very magnificent performance of Praggnanandhaa against world number one Magnus Carlsen.
Maybe he's got that in mind for a bit later on. Magnus,
Well,
meanwhile,
this is probably why Magnus has played his king up.
yeah, he's played his king up the board. I mean, maybe you can still proceed with your plan.
Oh, yes,
Ivanka.
maybe you can still do it.
Yeah, maybe it's less strong now somehow. But okay.
Yeah, king forward. I do like this move. Keeping control. You know, they have this kind of maxim in games, which is hurry, but don't rush. You know, and it's just all about improving your pieces and not spoiling those critical moments. And okay, Magnus gives a check to the white king. Where would you go, David? Would you continue to in the center, or would you?
I mean, yeah, you could go back where you came from, but then black will drop the knight back and you haven't really made any progress. Most ambitious is to go to the center, right? King of the hill, as they say. King in the castle, that white king occupying the center. Yeah, I would slide to the left one square, just attack that black knight. But choices for Pragg. Of course, that does entail some small risks if you do go too adventurous with your king. So he's just weighing up whether it's worth continuing the king's journey. Magnus looks quite composed, but maybe he's one player who always on the back foot in endgames. He is confident of holding slightly worse positions or positions when he's a pawn down. He knows he should still not lose this one as black, but maybe he doesn't realize that there is still some danger.
You mentioned that young players, one thing that sort of recognizes young players is that they see very optimistic on all their positions. So do you think Pragg is looking at this and being very optimistic and just seeing ways of winning this game?
I think we'll find out now, because Magnus, he's offering a repetition of the position. If Pragg moves his king up one square, that's the second time we will have seen that position. But Pragg, he's been optimistic so far in this game, right? And it's paid off.
Definitely. It definitely paid off. And I have to say, it's just like Surav on Twitter says. Magnus Carlsen struggling against a 1700 rated prodigy, which is a little bit unfair on Praggnanandhaa, because he's not 1700 really. It's exactly why we love chess. And here you go. Here is the break for freedom. So Praggnanandhaa just almost like playing with Magnus, saying yes.
Yeah. He's teasing the world champion here. He's asserting his dominance over the world champion.
Cheeky.
He did not go for the repetition immediately. He can still repeat the position if, Magnus doesn't look happy, right? He doesn't look happy at all. But, okay, Pragg has the option to make a draw immediately if he just brings his king across one square. But will he do it? He only has 3 minutes left. Will he play for the win? Can he go for your plan still, Ivanka? The problem is, if you don't repeat the position, black's king will get into the center of the board. It's looking difficult to win, but...
he's playing, so, he's taking the risks, and it's really paid off. I think why not continue? And I definitely agree. Go for my plan. Oh.
Okay, he goes for a different plan. His rook drops back one square. Maybe it's similar to your plan. Maybe he still wants to exchange those knights and get his rook into the game. Praggnanandhaa, just his attitude, his optimism, everything is so refreshing, right?
Yeah.
Not getting scared of the world champion. He's turned down a few opportunities now to go into a drawish position or to repeat the position. It's, this is what we like to see. And this type of attitude shows that he's going to go far and maybe one day will challenge for the world title.
I totally agree, and it is going to send a shiver down Magnus's spine, let's face it, because he's doing to Magnus what Magnus normally does to other people.
Exactly. In an endgame as well. To be so young and so confident, so calm in these endgames against the greatest endgame player probably of all time. Okay. Meanwhile, Magnus goes forward with his king. Black now threatening to win a pawn, so Pragg has to be quick with his ideas. His idea here must be to trade knights, right, Ivanka?
Yeah, and you were seeing it on the board. And the knights are going to get swapped off, and the big idea is that after king takes pawn, well, Praggnanandhaa would have immediately gone and challenged the black rook. Okay, but Magnus has been pushed back even further, and it's all going to be about that passed pawn in the middle.
If we bring up the analysis board, just to show what has changed with that knight swap, we do see in this position black dropping back with his rook. As Ivanka mentioned, The most natural move is actually to grab this pawn. Black a pawn ahead here, but white would slide up with his rook, kicking back the enemy rook. Black can't afford to exchange these rooks because white would queen this pawn, and instead white would have a choice of which pawns to snack on. Magnus preempts that by dropping his rook back first, but the same thing has happened pretty much. White brings his rook forward, eyeing up lots of pawns. We see a check, a trade, and whose pawn is faster? We've got a race now, Jovanka. This pawn is pretty far advanced. This pawn as well. It's only 3 squares away. How is white going to stop that? Do you stop it? Do you ignore it? It's definitely a race now. I'm not sure which one is going to be quicker.
Yeah, it's about counting, isn't it? And it's all going to hinge as well on what happens should the rooks actually give themselves away for the mutual passed pawns. And it could be, well, in that situation that the kings...
I mean, it could be a crazy king and pawn race if you imagine, as Jovanka's mentioning, black eventually giving his rook up for this pawn, white eventually maybe giving up his rook for this pawn. Suddenly it's about whose king is faster. Will this pawn be faster to win the game? Will this pawn be faster? It's so many different types of races right now. And Magnus here, he does have the luxury, however, of having a long time to work out and calculate these pawn races. Pragg, he's down to 2 minutes, and it's very tense. It's on the knife edge right now. Personally, I would just push this pawn and hope for the best, but even then, the consequences are so unclear. This one, yeah, it's getting exciting still.
And look at the bottom of the picture now. We see that Karyakin Tari. It could be that Tari is looking quite good against Sergei Karyakin, and it is Tari and Pragg on the same score right now in 10th and 11th place, both fighting to qualify. So a win here would actually be kind of important to Pragg.
Yeah, and he's not shown any fear. He's not caring who the opponent is. He's still playing for that win, turning down the opportunity to make draws. Look at that, bringing his rook back. That rook will be needed on that bottom line to stop the advance of black's pawn, to stop the promotion of black's pawn into a queen. So, yeah, looks like a very sensible move. And next, Pragg's idea is to march the white king up the board and kind of hold the hand of the white pawn and guide it towards promotion. Magnus, he's playing instantly every move, but I would be terrified as black here, because one wrong move, if you're one move too slow in the race, you're just losing. And, okay, Magnus gives a check with his rook. That's an important one. When white's king sidesteps to the left, I mean, there's nowhere else to go, black's rook will drop down and defend its own pawn.
From the back, isn't it? Yeah. Sorry, he would defend the pawn from the side and start giving...
From the side.
And control the enemy pawn from the back. And that's where rooks love to be. They love to be defending from the back. This is actually magnificent play by Magnus. Very defensive, but absolutely exemplary. What an idea.
Yeah, I'm just trying to wonder whether maybe Pragg missed a small opportunity, but yeah, either way, it's not clear. Maybe he could have gone with his king before his rook, and he would have had great winning chances. But okay, Magnus is still the one fighting for the draw.
Okay, but I mean, can we still kind of push the pawn forward and...
Yep. If white's pawn pushes forward now, black's rook has to give check from behind to try and stop that pawn.
Okay, so we're seeing it on the board. Okay, so now Magnus has given a check, and now I'm just thinking, just march your king a little bit forward, one square diagonally forward to attack the pawn. Yep, Praggnanandhaa has played it, and now...
Black has to keep giving checks because actually white was threatening to take black's pawn there and win the game immediately by distracting the black rook.
Yes.
And now black's rook, he's going to do a bit of a dance up and down, right and left, just checking the white king, attacking the pawn, checking the white king, attacking the pawn. How are you going to win this one though, Jovanka? Is there a way for the...
With help.
With help.
Okay, so maybe I can just support the pawn one more time.
With the king?
Yes.
Okay, I'll give you a check again.
Correct.
Okay, so you'll support the king. I'll give a check.
I'll hide my king in front of the...
In front of the pawn. Now, maybe you have to be careful of this king coming, or maybe black has time... Oh, whoops, sorry. Me and my arrows. Black has time maybe to grab this pawn. Instead, the king has gone the other direction. It's still getting checked, though. Pragg, he's still trying to win. Every move, though, his opponent's going to give check. Magnus has to give a check here to survive. Where's this king going to hide? There's just no safe haven here. Maybe there's just no way for Pragg to win. It's so close. One move away, but not close enough. The world champion defending tenaciously. And after the king hides on this square, black's rook has gone back. It looks like we might be repeating the position. Let's go back to Pragg. I want to see how how disappointed or how excited he's looking.
He's trying, David.
He's trying.
I mean, we do admire his gutsiness, and he's taken his chances on this endgame. And unfortunately, I think because White's pawns are so far backwards and Black's pieces are quite active, I don't think it's enough to. Well, actually, I believe it's not enough to draw. I mean, to win.
To win, yeah. Unfortunately for White, he does have, one passed pawn on that left side, which will try and march up the board and become a queen, but he does have a weak pawn on the other side, and now White's rook is forced onto a terrible square in order to defend it. So Black's king, sooner or later, will actually go after that pawn. Still some work to be done by the world champion, but he tends to be fantastic in these rook and pawn endings. Often if you're just one pawn up, especially when it's a corner pawn, a rook's pawn, it's not ideal because you can get checked from the side and you can't use your pawn to block. You can't hide your king away behind its own pawn if it's a rook's pawn. You need an extra line to the side. And here Black's going after White's pawn. This one should be a draw, but Pragg still trying. Again, he is the only one who can win.
Yeah. So are we expecting Pragg just simply to abandon the defense of the pawn on the right and simply push the one on the left? And we're seeing that on the board.
That's right. He's trying his best to get his pawn running, to get that race started. But the problem is, once he does lose this pawn on the right, which he will after Black's king advances.
Black starts pushing his pawn.
Black's going to push his pawn, and at the very least, Black can eventually give up the black rook for White's pawn on the left and just march his pawn down. I think both rooks will have to give each other up for their opposing pawns. And I'm hoping the players played out right to the bitter end, just to show us exactly how the game will finish and reach a logical conclusion. I really like what Pragg's done. He's got so close, actually. It'll be interesting to analyse that endgame in more detail to see if he did miss a chance, because this one, the world champion, pushing that pawn, I'm slightly surprised. I would have just gone forward with the king one square, just immediately kick away that white rook and take away White's pawn, but
Magnus is saying, I can do that whenever I like, David.
But I would be slightly afraid of White pushing a pawn up now, once pushing his pawn up on that right side, but probably there's just a way to win it anyway.
And look at the result in Praggnanandhaa. Tari has been able to get a win in that super important game for the 21-year-old. He is still fighting to qualify for the knockout stage, which would be huge for the 21-year-old Norwegian. Pragg, he was on the same score as Pragg before this round. Looks like Pragg only will get half a point away from this one.
Yeah, but either way, even if Pragg doesn't qualify for these knockouts, so many positive signs.
Yeah.
He's beaten some of the top players in the world, but also, to take the world champion to a position like this, Magnus has had to be so accurate just to hold the draw.
Yeah.
It's good signs of things to come.
I really hope we get a reaction from Magnus after this game, and if he can tell us if he's impressed by this 15-year-old, he must be.
I can't even describe how impressed I am by him. Meanwhile, White has kept his pawn alive on the right. His pawn on the left is marching forward, but look how Magnus has cut off the White king. The White king is trapped in front of his own pawn right now. That's a really instructive formation, and now White is going to actually run out of moves, so eventually his rook will have to move, giving up his pawn. Magnus, he's trapped that White king.
Yes,
very instructive.
He's making it clear. He's kind of almost saying to Praggnanandhaa, you can have the dream, but it's not enough.
Yep.
Because Praggnanandhaa pushes this pawn as far as it can go, and now I think the only chance to try to win this is simply to try to create some form of bridge for the White king to escape. But as soon as that happens, if the White king is released, then Magnus can just simply give up his rook for the pawn, and unfortunately, with the White king being so far away from those two pawns on the right, just cannot stop that pawn from queening.
Yeah, and there we go, Praggnanandhaa. He does give up his pawn because there was nothing else to do, and the White rook is going to try and build a bridge for the king to finally step out of the way of its pawn. There we go. Now Black's pawn, though, is going to cost White his rook long term. This one headed towards a draw. I was wondering if we'd see some kind of stylish stalemate when White's king was trapped in the corner, but Pragg wanted to keep trying to win, and both rooks are going to have to give themselves up for those pawns, and a draw is imminent.
Yeah. How is... Okay, is it a draw here? Magnus looks like he's very finished with the game, at least.
We're going to go for king against king, though, I think. Fighting it out right to the end. This is what a draw should be, a real fighting game.
Yeah.
Shouldn't be a quick repetition.
And now it's in... there it is. It's a draw between 15-year-old Praggnanandhaa and world champion Carlsen. Magnus not looking too happy. It's not disappointment either, but... how is Pragg feeling after this? I mean, a draw against the world champion, fantastic,